I knew it was time to shut things down and leave the master control booth before someone barged in to stop me. If I acted fast enough, I could disable the live assist mode and set the system back to full automation. The local TV audience had seen more than enough for one night. Once everything was running smoothly again, I'd be free to leave and grab a much-needed drink. Trust me, I was craving one pretty bad. Of course, I was fully aware that there'd be hell to pay later. Between Laura at home, the general manager at work, and possibly the FCC breathing down my neck, the consequences were inevitable. But at that point, I couldn't bring myself to care. I felt like I was already stuck in a lousy situation, and honestly, all I wanted was a cold beer. I headed straight to Frankie's on Roswell Road, the go-to sports bar around here, and ordered my first round. Sitting there, I sipped my beer and watched the last minutes of the Monday night football game, knocking back a few more as the evening dragged on. The bar was buzzing with chatter, and I could tell what everyone was talking about. I didn't catch every word, but I heard enough to know my little stunt had stirred up quite a bit of conversation. Thankfully, no one dragged me into their discussions, so I sat alone, quietly drinking, while watching the Saints tear apart the Falcons. By 10:30 p.m., I was well on my way to feeling numb. The game was over, and my team had lost, 23-3. The Saints had played like they had something to prove, probably because it was their first game back in their home stadium since the hurricane. They completely outplayed the Falcons from start to finish. Our station had aired the game alongside ESPN since Atlanta was one of the teams involved. After a while, I asked the bartender if I could leave my car overnight in the parking lot. He agreed, saying it was smart given my condition. Noticing how out of it I was, he even called me a cab. Since I lived nearby in a decent neighborhood in Sandy Springs, it wouldn't be a long ride home. So, that's how the night ended. But to give you the full picture, I should probably start from the beginning. My name's Daniel Brooks, though most folks just call me Dan. I work as a broadcast engineer at WBDK, a CBS affiliate based in Atlanta. I've got a master's degree in electrical engineering and computer science from MIT, plus another degree in broadcast technologies. I'm not just good at my job, I'm damn good at it. I've been in the industry for over 2 decades, working at various TV stations along the East Coast before settling in Atlanta 5 years ago. If you're curious about what I look like, I'm 46 years old with dark hair that's begun to gray at the temples. I've never been one to hide the gray, though I do touch up my mustache now, and then to keep it from looking too old. I'm 6 feet 3 inches, and weigh around 190 pounds. At least, that's what I tell myself, though it's been ages since I stepped on a scale. I'd say I'm reasonably attractive, not Hollywood handsome or anything, but not bad for a guy my age. I'm not familiar with the younger celebrities, so comparing myself to one of them wouldn't make much sense, but let's just say I don't look like someone you'd see on the cover of a romance novel. Now, about my wife Laura. She's been by my side for 22 years, and together we've raised 2 daughters, Jessica and Rachel. Jessica's married now, while Rachel is finishing up college. Laura's around 5 feet 5 inches, and weighs no more than 135 pounds. She's got long blonde hair that falls to her shoulders, and, honestly, she's stunning. She's got the kind of looks that draw attention wherever we go, and people can't help but like her. At least, that's what I used to think. For the past year and a half, Laura's been working as a secretary at our church for Reverend Jim Fisher. And that brings me to last Friday. I had some extra time during lunch and thought I'd surprise Laura by taking her out to eat. Since it was raining, I parked near the side entrance of the church offices. When I got there, she wasn't at her desk, but I decided to walk in anyway. That's when I overheard Laura talking to Pastor Jim in his office. She was excited about Monday night, saying how she was looking forward to spending time with him while I'd be busy covering the football game. I froze. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Their conversation quickly took a turn toward the intimate. They talked about booking a room at the La Quinta Inn and how they couldn't wait to be alone together. My stomach turned, and a wave of rage and nausea hit me all at once. I wanted to storm in there and confront them on the spot, but something stopped me. I knew if I did, I might lose control and do something I'd regret. So, instead, I quietly slipped out the same way I came in, hoping they hadn't noticed me. There were security cameras around, but I'd come in through a side door that likely wasn't being monitored. As I drove away, it felt like one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I was too shaken to focus on anything else, So I called my station and told them I wasn't feeling well and needed the rest of the day off. I figured going home would give me some time to think things through before Laura got back around 4 p.m. It was painfully clear. Laura was having an affair with Pastor Jim. In my mind, he was no longer Reverend Jim. From now on, he was Bastard Jim. That seemed like a more fitting title. I had so many questions racing through my head. How long had this been going on? Why had it started? What did I do to deserve this? Some people might prefer to remain in the dark, but not me. I needed answers. I needed to know everything about their affair. When, why, and how. I couldn't just let it slide. Laura wasn't who I thought she was. The marriage I believed was solid clearly wasn't in her eyes. I made up my mind right then. I'd get to the bottom of it and deal with both of them accordingly. I wasn't about to roll over and play the fool. I was going to handle this head-on. Once I got home, I made myself a pot of coffee and headed out to the patio to clear my head. The weather was pleasant, and the fresh air helped me settle down as I tried to make sense of everything. Deep down, I knew I'd get to the bottom of this sooner or later. I just needed to calm myself first. I won't lie. I shed a few tears that afternoon. It was hard not to. Look, I've never believed I owned Laura or had any claim over her body. But that didn't change how gut-wrenching it felt to know she was being intimate with someone else, especially after making vows to me on our wedding day. Maybe some folks don't take those vows seriously, but I did. I thought she did too. And when something like this happens, it messes with your entire belief system. You start questioning whether you've been naive your whole life to believe in love, fidelity, and the sanctity of marriage. The worst part of being cheated on isn't just the betrayal. It's losing faith in the person you thought you knew. You can't trust anything they say or do anymore. The very foundation of your relationship crumbles, leaving you exposed and afraid. I'm not a small guy. I'm 6 feet 3 inches and 190 pounds. But in that moment, I felt small, vulnerable, and scared. That's how badly a cheating spouse can break you, reducing you to nothing with just a few lies. As I sat there, trying to keep my emotions in check and think logically, memories of past doubts crept in. Little things I'd brushed off over time now came flooding back, each one hitting me harder than the last. How could I have been so blind? The answer was simple: trust. I had trusted her completely, and now that trust was shattered into pieces, and those tiny moments of doubt I'd ignored became a heavy burden weighing me down. I needed answers, real answers. I wanted to know why she did it, how long it had been going on, where they met, how often, and whether anyone else knew about it. My trust in her was gone, but my need to know the truth burned brighter than ever. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. My marriage, as I knew it, was a lie. Before I could confront Laura, I needed clarity. I wasn't ready to face her without some concrete facts. At 3 p.m., unwilling to be home when she got back, I grabbed my keys and left. I drove into town, swung by the station to grab a few things I'd need for the coming days, and spoke briefly with my boss. I explained that I needed a few days off to handle personal matters, and thankfully, he was understanding. From there, I headed to Frankie's again to kill time before heading home. Around 5 p.m., I called Laura to let her know I wouldn't be home for dinner. Her response was typical Laura. She sounded irritated and mentioned that she had plans for the evening and was feeling frisky. If I didn't show up, she warned, those plans would be canceled. Yeah, right. Like I'd want to be her way of relieving tension built up from her time with Bastard Jim. Let her figure things out on her own. I played along, saying, "Stay excited for me, sweetheart. I'll take care of you when I get back." I knew that would rile her up. Her response was sharp. "Don't count on it, pal. If you think you can treat me like this, you'll be going without for a while." Perfect. That was exactly what I wanted. There was no way I'd be touching her until I knew exactly what was going on, and maybe never again. By the time I got home around 10:30 p.m., I was pretty drunk but still sober enough to notice the bedroom door was locked. I couldn't help but smirk as I knocked loudly, guessing she was still awake. "Fine, if that's how you want it," I called out. "Don't expect me to cater to your needs. Just suffer." Then I went straight to the spare bedroom, knowing my move would irritate her. At least it bought me some time. I wouldn't have to explain why I wasn't interested in being close to her that night. The next morning, she was already sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee when I walked in. The tension was thick, and her glare was as icy as the air in the room. If I hadn't known about her affair, that look might have made me uneasy. Instead, I gave her a smug grin and said, "No need to get up and make breakfast, honey. I'll grab something on the way to golf." Without waiting for a response, I grabbed my clubs, headed out through the kitchen door, and drove off. It didn't take long for her to call me. I saw her name on the screen, but let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, I checked the message. She was fuming. "You jerk. How could you do this to me? Get back here right now." Bastard? No, Laura. That title belonged to Bastard Jim, not me. If anyone deserved it, it was him. I wasn't the one sneaking around behind my spouse's back. I had no intention of actually going golfing. It was just a cover to buy some time. Instead, I drove straight to what used to be my church. Did you honestly think I'd sit through another sermon from Bastard Jim after what I'd learned? It was early, so I figured the place would be empty, and I was right. Since Laura worked there, we had a key to the building. I let myself in and headed straight for the offices. My goal was simple: install remote microcameras and mini microphones in both Laura's office and Bastard Jim's office. It didn't take long to set them up. I hid the transmitter behind some old hymnals in the supply closet across the hall, where no one would think to look. The receiver was wired into my car's electrical system, allowing me to monitor their conversations whenever they were in their offices. I didn't expect much to happen right away, but I figured a few days of surveillance would give me some useful insight. After double-checking that everything was working correctly, I rummaged through Laura's desk. Nothing stood out at first, but then I noticed something on her calendar, a big red asterisk marked for Monday. It lined up perfectly with what I had overheard last Friday. I made a mental note to prepare for that. Next, I checked Bastard Jim's office. I didn't find anything incriminating at first, but just as I was about to give up, an idea hit me. Inspired by my surroundings, I decided to dig through the filing cabinets. Maybe there were receipts or records that could shed light on church expenditures related to their affair. Sure enough, I found exactly what I was hoping for. Receipts from the La Quinta Inn in Roswell. Some dated back to late 2005, while others were from the spring of 2006. Knowing I was risking too much by lingering, I quickly made copies of the receipts and carefully put everything back in its place before leaving. Afterward, I drove over to the golf course and parked in my usual spot. I walked into the clubhouse to make sure I was seen, then grabbed a table and nursed a Sprite for a couple of hours while going through the receipts. My blood boiled as I examined the dates. Both receipts from late 2005 were Mondays, dates that coincided perfectly with my trips to CBS headquarters in New York for conferences. What really enraged me was Bastard Jim's sheer nerve to charge those motel rooms to the church, labeling them as conference room rental for meetings. The man had been sneaking off with my wife to a cheap motel, and I had unknowingly helped pay for it through my contributions to the church. That was it. No more donations from me. I wasn't going to give another dime to fund their sordid little affair. With just a bit more evidence, I knew I could take them both down. I was sure now that this had been going on for nearly a year, if not longer. In fact, I started to suspect that their relationship might have begun before Laura even started working for him. Looking back, it made sense. Laura had once worked as a receptionist at the Telfer Corporation, which was a decent job. But when she suddenly decided to switch to working at the church, she had claimed it was because the location was closer to home and the job allowed her to serve the community. She'd even said the pay was about the same. But now I could see it for what it was. She wasn't drawn to the job itself. She was drawn to the perks that came with being close to Jim. My anger grew with every passing thought. How could I have been so blind? How could the woman I'd loved and trusted for so many years betray me so easily? I wasn't about to let it go. I was going to make them pay for what they'd done. Determined to dig deeper, I went back to my car, pulled out my iPod, and tuned it to pick up the frequency of the receiver I had hidden in the trunk. I scanned through the data and soon picked up Bastard Jim entering his office. I could hear him dialing a number. Unfortunately, since I hadn't managed to bug his phone directly, I could only hear his side of the conversation. Still, it was better than nothing. "Hey Laura, I'm at the church now. You called. What's got you so worked up?" he said. There was a pause, during which I assumed Laura was responding. Then Jim asked, "Oh, really? Has he done that before?" Another pause. He continued, pressing her. What do you think set him off this time? Yet another pause. Then, in a more serious tone, he added, You don't think he suspects us, do you? After another moment of silence, he chuckled and said, All right then, well, you can make it up to him, or get back at him, Monday night. He hung up, then sat quietly for a while. Just as I was about to turn off the receiver, I heard him muttering something under his breath. I made sure to record it, thinking it might come in handy later. With that, I headed home, fully expecting a frosty reception. As soon as I arrived, I busied myself with chores, mowing the lawn, cleaning out the basement, anything to keep my mind occupied and avoid talking to Laura. She didn't say much, but the tension in the house was palpable. It was only a matter of time before she broke the silence. At dinner, she finally snapped. Dan, what's going on with you lately? Why are you acting like this? She demanded. I didn't hesitate. Laura, considering you locked me out of the bedroom last night, maybe you should be asking yourself what's going on with you. I kept my tone calm but firm. It's not often I go out with the guys, and the one time I do, you throw a fit. If anyone's acting out of line here, it's you. Her frustration boiled over. Damn you, she spat. I met her glare without flinching. Is that how a good Christian woman speaks? I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Your actions aren't exactly reflecting the values you like to preach about. Her face said it all, guilt, plain as day. She might have thought she was good at hiding things, but at that moment, anyone could have seen through her. To her credit, she managed to recover quickly and excused herself from the table. But I knew that when the time came to confront her with the full truth, she wouldn't recover so gracefully. Later that evening, she wandered into the family room where I was watching TV, Fox News, trying to find something resembling balanced coverage. Her eyes were a little swollen, like she'd been crying. We didn't exchange many words after that, and when I was ready for bed, I simply walked down the hall to the spare bedroom and turned in. A few minutes later, she came to the doorway and stood there. What's wrong? I asked, not bothering to mask my indifference. Aren't you coming to bed? She asked hesitantly. Nope, I replied flatly. You made it pretty clear last night that intimacy's off the table, so I might as well sleep alone and get a good night's rest. Without waiting for a response, I turned away, and she quickly left, crying as she went. Frankly, I didn't care. The next morning, she woke me up at 8 a.m., already dressed for church. Are you coming with me? She asked, trying to keep her tone light. Nope, I said again, this time with a smirk. You go ahead and play the role of the perfect church lady. I'm staying home and enjoying a quiet day. Her face briefly faltered, but she pulled herself together and left. As she walked out, I caught a glimpse of sadness in her eyes. Good. She was starting to sense that something was off. After a while, I heard her car pulling out of the driveway. She tried starting a conversation with me later that day, but I wasn't in the mood. I brushed her off, telling her to leave me alone. That pretty much ended Sunday. We both kept to ourselves, retreating into separate corners of the house. When Monday morning rolled around, I left the house without seeing or speaking to her. As I was heading out, my phone buzzed. Laura's voice on the other end was shaky and tearful. She apologized, told me she loved me, and pleaded for us to work through things. I kept my tone neutral. We'll talk about it when I get back tonight, I said before ending the call. I then informed my boss that while I was still taking the day off, I would be available to handle the Monday night football broadcast as planned. He seemed pleased and asked how I was holding up. As well as can be expected, I replied with a half-hearted smile. My next stop was the La Quinta Inn in Roswell. Once inside, I approached the front desk where a young guy named Ryan was working. Without wasting time, I leveled with him. I suspected my wife of cheating, and there was a good chance she'd be at the motel that night with another man. At first, he seemed doubtful, but I made him an offer. If he let me plant a microphone in the room to record their conversation, I'd give him a couple of tickets to the next Falcons game. He thought about it and pushed back, asking for 4 tickets. I agreed without hesitation, knowing I could get them easily through the station. With that, he handed me the key to the only available Whirlpool suite. Ryan didn't know I had more in mind than just a microphone. I intended to set up a couple of mini cameras as well, similar to the ones I'd installed in the church offices. I even placed a bug in the phone line to capture both sides of any calls they made. After carefully positioning the devices, I ran a quick test. The audio was clear, and the camera angles gave me a good view of both the bed and the whirlpool. Satisfied with the setup, I made sure everything was well hidden, then locked up and returned the key to Ryan. I handed him the promised tickets. "Thanks, Ryan. Hope everything goes as planned. Enjoy the game." With plenty of time before the game, I set out to take care of a few important tasks. My first stop was the bank, where I withdrew half of the funds from both our checking and savings accounts and converted them into cashier's checks. From there, I canceled our joint credit cards to prevent any sudden splurges on Laura's part. Next, I called my broker and arranged a meeting to discuss splitting our investment accounts. He assured me everything would be ready by the time I arrived. After that, I called my attorney. We scheduled a meeting later that afternoon to go over the initial steps for divorce proceedings. I made it clear I wanted to pursue a no-fault divorce with an even split of assets, but I also instructed him to prepare a backup strategy. If Laura dragged her feet, we'd file on grounds of adultery. Confident that I had a solid plan, I made my way to Planters National Bank in Marietta and opened new accounts solely in my name, depositing the cashier's checks there. By the time I was done, it was lunchtime, though I didn't have much of an appetite. Still, I stopped for a quick bite in Marietta before heading to my broker's office. He had prepared the paperwork exactly as we discussed, ensuring that our portfolio could be split without triggering unnecessary tax liabilities. All that remained was for both Laura and me to sign. I gathered the documents and proceeded to meet with my attorney. We went over the draft of the divorce papers, and everything seemed in order. With that, I knew I had done everything necessary to protect myself financially. All I needed now was a quick dinner before heading to the station for the broadcast. After leaving my attorney's office, I turned my phone back on and noticed a couple of messages from Laura. She sounded concerned, asking me to come home so we could talk before the game. I read her messages with a mix of anger and disbelief. Despite knowing what she had planned for the night, she still had the audacity to reach out with sweet words and feigned concern. How blind had I been to love and trust her so completely? It was infuriating. By that point, I'd made a decision. If Laura didn't show up at the motel that night, there might still be a sliver of hope for our marriage. It would mean she cared enough to try to fix things and recognized how much damage had been done. But if she went through with it, well, then she and Bastard Jim would have to face the consequences of their actions. At 8 p.m., I activated the automated system for the evening's broadcast, which ensured Monday Night Football aired without issue. With the broadcast underway, I turned my attention to the motel surveillance setup. At precisely 8:15, I watched as Jim entered the room and made a call. "Hey, I'm here. Can you come over soon?" he said into the phone. A female voice responded, "I'll be there shortly." After ending the call, Jim muttered something under his breath. I made a mental note to review that later for anything useful. As I watched him pacing around the room, I couldn't help but reflect on how this could be the end of my marriage. A part of me still clung to the faint hope that things might turn around, but deep down, I knew better. The betrayal had cut too deep, and the only thing keeping me going was the thought of some form of justice. With time to kill, I went through my contacts, making calls to a few key people. It took a little while, but eventually, I reached everyone I needed. By the time I was done, Laura had arrived at the motel. I turned my attention back to the live feed. Their conversation wasn't just casual. It was deeply personal and disturbingly intimate. The way they spoke, the familiarity in their tone, and the secretive nature of their relationship made it clear that this affair had been going on for much longer than I had originally suspected. Listening to them was like a punch to the gut. These were two people who, in public, presented themselves as virtuous pillars of the community, a pastor and a devoted church secretary. Yet here they were, sinking into the kind of depravity that made me sick to my stomach. As the conversation continued, I realized just how twisted the situation had become. Jim and Laura weren't just having a fling. They were emotionally entangled, and their relationship had layers I hadn't anticipated. Watching her settle on the bed, clearly ready for an intimate encounter, made my blood boil. Whatever they were about to receive tonight, they had it coming. They deserved every bit of it. The camera captured every grim detail, Her eager expression, the anticipation in her eyes right before things turned physical. The sounds that followed were unmistakable, a mix of breathless exclamations and gasps, laced with emotions I could only describe as passion and satisfaction. "Oh, this is intense," I heard her say, her voice carrying both excitement and fulfillment. "This is what I needed," she added, a confirmation that she was not only a willing participant but craving every second of it. Jim, caught up in the moment, responded with a boldness that made my stomach churn. "This will be unforgettable," he declared, oblivious to the weight of his words. Her replies were unfiltered and vocal, urging him to keep going. "Continue. This is what I want," she demanded, her voice rising as she neared her peak. His final moves were deliberate, signaling the end of one round for them and, for me, the painful realization that this wasn't just a fling. It was something deeper, something far more humiliating. But it wasn't over. After a brief pause, they began again, her reactions louder and more intense. I couldn't take much more. Watching her respond to him like that, hearing her cries of pleasure, it crushed me. I could never give her what she clearly wanted from him. The disparity between what I thought our marriage was and what it had become was staggering. I felt powerless, emasculated. Their performance dragged on, becoming more than I could bear. Finally, they paused, likely taking a break. The weight of what I'd just witnessed settled over me like a heavy blanket. The depth of their connection, the way I was completely excluded from it. It was a brutal truth to face. But I didn't have time to dwell. I made a decision right then and there. I switched the broadcast system to a mode that would allow their actions to be revealed to a wider audience. This wasn't just about me anymore. I wanted the world to see what they really were, two people hiding behind false facades. As the phone lines at the station lit up, signaling the start of the fallout, I braced myself for the storm ahead. I dialed Laura's number, heart pounding as I waited for her to pick up. I imagined her glancing at the caller ID, perhaps with a smug grin, thinking she could ignore me. "It's Dan," I heard her say, probably to Jim, her tone filled with defiance. "I'm not answering this time. Let him stew. Keep going, honey, while he's on the line." I gritted my teeth and disconnected, but I wasn't giving up that easily. I dialed again, this time determined not to let her brush me off. After a few rings, she hesitated. "Guess I better take it," she mumbled before fumbling with the phone. "Hello, Dan," she answered coldly, her voice devoid of warmth. "Laura, where are you? What are you doing right now?" I asked, my voice steady but probing. She didn't miss a beat. "I decided to go shopping since you didn't bother to call earlier. Just grabbing something to eat before heading home," she lied effortlessly, her tone as smooth as ever. "Shopping at this hour?" I pressed, letting my skepticism show. "Yeah, and I'm planning to splurge," she shot back defiantly. "Fantastic, Laura. You've been such a wonderful wife," I replied, my sarcasm barely concealing my hurt. "Don't talk to me like that, you jerk. I don't know what's gotten into you," she snapped before ending the call abruptly. Her words stung, but I wasn't about to let them get to me. I had another plan. Instead of calling her directly again, I decided to interrupt their little rendezvous in a more direct way. I called the motel. Ryan answered after a few rings. "Ryan, it's Dan. You watching Monday Night Football?" I asked, keeping my tone casual despite the turmoil inside me. "No," he replied, sounding confused. "Well, you might want to start. Also, could you ring the Whirlpool suite for me?" After a brief pause, I heard Jim's voice. "Hey, what do you want, Dan?" he said, clearly annoyed. "Bastard Jim, let me speak to Laura," I demanded, keeping my anger tightly controlled. A moment later, Laura's voice came on. "Dan, why are you calling here?" "Laura, I know everything. The lies, the cheating. I'm filing for divorce and you're out," I said with a calmness that surprised even me. "And Jim, you're not getting off easy either." "What's wrong with you, Dan?" "I don't understand what's going on with you lately," Laura retorted, feigning confusion. "It's over, Laura," I said firmly. "Maybe you should turn on Monday Night Football for a change. Enjoy the show." I hung up without waiting for a response, my decision final. On the live monitor, I saw her turn on the TV. Her eyes widened in shock as she recognized the scene playing out on screen. "Oh no! Oh no! Oh no!" she repeated, scrambling to get dressed. Jim, realizing the gravity of the situation, cursed as he hurried to leave. "I'll destroy that son of a witch," he muttered angrily. "Careful what you mutter, Jim," I thought to myself. "It might come back to haunt you." Once they were gone, I powered down the monitors and let the video run its course. Then, I switched off the live assist mode and returned the system to fully automated broadcast. Grabbing the tape and a few personal items from my desk, I walked out of the broadcast booth, probably for the last time. Now you're caught up. I spent the rest of the night at Frankie's. As expected, my halftime show was the talk of the night. After the game, I called a cab and went home. Laura was sitting in the darkened living room when I arrived, the phone off the hook and tears streaming down her face. She sobbed uncontrollably, but I felt nothing. It was over for me. "How could you do this to me, Dan?" she cried. "After everything we've been through?" "No, Laura," I said coldly. "The real question is, how could you do this to me?" "I'm drunk. I'm going to bed." "We'll talk tomorrow," she said between sobs. I left her on the sofa and went to the spare bedroom. The next morning, when I came out, she was still there, looking exhausted and defeated. It was obvious Laura hadn't slept, her eyes red and puffy. But frankly, I didn't care. She was reaping what she'd sown, and I wasn't about to let myself feel sorry for her. I replaced the phone on the hook, and it immediately began to ring. For the next hour, I fielded call after call: family, friends, church members, my former boss, and even our daughters. All of them were disturbed by what they had seen during the halftime show. Some were angry, others simply confused, but none of them could be consoled. I knew it wasn't easy for them, but they were adults. They'd get over it. One call came from Mrs. Bastard Jim. She asked if I had a copy of the tape. I assured her I had it safely stored and would provide it if needed. Clearly, she was as blindsided by Jim's behavior as I was by Laura's. Some callers criticized me for making the affair public, including Laura's parents, who were mortified by the scandal. But the majority expressed sympathy. They knew how hard this must have been for me. Laura sat silently, tears rolling down her cheeks, but I felt nothing for her. Not anger, not pity, just indifference. After the constant ringing became too much, I left the phone off the hook, poured myself a cup of coffee, and brought another one to Laura. Without any preamble, I set the coffee in front of her and slid the divorce papers and investment documents across the table. "I'm filing for divorce, Laura," I said, keeping my tone even. "What I saw last night makes it clear that you've been unfaithful for a while. I can't stay in this marriage knowing that. These documents are for a no-fault divorce, and I'm offering an equal split of everything. It's fair." Her eyes flicked down to the papers, then back to me, wide with disbelief. I pressed on before she could interrupt. "You have until 5 p.m. today to get legal advice and sign. If you don't, after 5:01, I'll file for divorce on grounds of adultery. And if that happens, I'll push for a property division based on our individual contributions. I've done my research. That approach benefits me a lot more than you. This is your best offer." She opened her mouth to speak, but I wasn't done. "If you try to fight this and it goes public, everyone in Atlanta will know what happened. Every sordid detail. So think carefully, Laura. This is the cleanest way out for both of us." Her lips quivered, and her eyes filled with tears. "Dan, I still love you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can't we try to fix things? I know I made a mistake, but I don't want to lose you." "This isn't about love anymore," I replied, my voice cold. "It's about your actions and what they did to us. You put someone else ahead of our marriage. I can't ignore that, and I won't pretend it didn't happen. You should call your lawyer and get this sorted." There was no yelling, no dramatic outburst, just silence and quiet tears. After some time, she disappeared into the bedroom, and when she returned, she carried the signed papers. Her expression was a mix of resignation and faint hope. "My lawyer reviewed everything and said your offer is fair," she murmured. "Is there any chance we could talk? I'd like to explain what happened, maybe see if there's any chance of us working through this." I considered it for a moment. Part of me wanted closure. Maybe hearing her story would help me understand how everything had gone so wrong. So I agreed, and we sat down at the kitchen table. She took a deep breath and began. There was no one else, Dan. It was just Jim, she admitted. It started a little before I took the job at the church. I didn't plan for it to happen, but there was something about him. His charm, maybe. I can't explain it. I was happy with you, but I felt drawn to him. I thought he loved me. I stayed quiet, letting her finish. She looked at me with pleading eyes, hoping I'd believe her sincerity. When she was done, I leaned forward and met her gaze. I get it. Jim's charismatic, I said, my tone neutral. But let's clear up one thing. He never loved you. To him, you were just a toy. I pulled out my phone and played 2 audio clips I'd saved. The first was from the day I overheard them. That idiot woman better keep our affair quiet. She's sweet, but she won't last. She was easy to seduce, but she needs to go. Laura's face drained of color. I didn't stop. I played the second clip, recorded before she arrived at the motel. I'll ravage her tonight and fire her tomorrow. If she makes a fuss, I'll threaten to expose her to Dan. Can't let him find out. The silence that followed was deafening. Laura stared at the table, tears falling freely. So, not only did you wreck our marriage, but you also completely misjudged him, I said, my voice steady but firm. He didn't care about you. I saw how he treated you, and worse, I saw how you enjoyed it. I could never treat you like that because I respected you. I loved you. But that respect is gone. You broke our vows, Laura, and we can't come back from that. She sobbed quietly, acknowledging the truth in my words. After a long pause, she signed both sets of papers without further argument. I told her I would be relocating soon, giving her some time to find a new place before I moved out for good. There was nothing left to say. She had made her choices, and now we were both living with the fallout. It was time to move on alone. Financially, I doubted Laura could maintain the house, and I certainly didn't want to stay there, surrounded by painful memories. We agreed to sell the property and split the proceeds evenly, just like the rest of our assets. After collecting my paperwork and pre-packed bags, I left, dropping off documents at my broker's office before checking into a hotel for the night. The following day, I met with my attorney, who promptly filed the divorce papers with the county's Superior Court. We also discussed the fallout from my actions at the station and with the FCC. He warned me of potential fines, damage to my career, and legal issues. Jail time seemed unlikely, but steep financial penalties and the loss of my broadcasting license were real possibilities. Within days, the consequences hit. The FCC served me, initiating a legal battle that drained nearly a year's worth of savings. Worse, my broadcast license was officially revoked, barring me from working in the industry for 2 years. It seemed like the end of my career, but there was a silver lining. TT, a senior executive familiar with my situation, offered me a job in a role that complied with FCC restrictions. Despite the dubious legality of my actions, TT sympathized with me, likely because of his own bitter divorce experience. For that, I felt a measure of gratitude. As for Bastard Jim, he confronted me once at Frankie's, clearly looking for a fight. Things escalated quickly, and I pinned him down before calmly asserting, "I don't want to hear from you again. Is that clear?" He glared and spat back, "Forget you." Not in the mood for games, I leaned in and added, "I have an audio recording of you threatening me. I could take it to the police, get a restraining order, and press charges. You'd be looking at jail time. Is that what you want?" Jim shook his head, unwilling to push further. I gave him a nudge in the ribs for good measure. "Well, I guess that's the end of this conversation." He walked away humiliated. Though he's no longer a pastor, ousted from the church and stripped of his ordination, he's still the same despicable man. Last I heard, he found a job at a local travel agency. Despite his charm, he'll need to hustle now, especially after his wife successfully sued him for divorce on grounds of adultery, securing a hefty settlement. My incriminating tape likely played a major role in her victory, though its legality was questionable. As for me, I'm moving on. Life isn't perfect, but I'm learning to find happiness again. Over the past few months, I've casually dated a few women but haven't pursued anything serious. I've refrained from sexual relationships because I still believe intimacy should be reserved for marriage. My values haven't changed, even if others think differently. When I meet the right person, I'll marry her, and together we'll share that experience. Until then, I'm patient. I trust that the right partner will come along when the time is right. I occasionally see Laura at family events, Rachel's college graduation, Jessica's baby's baptism. I remain civil but distant. I've made it clear that I'm there for our daughters, not her. I'm not interested in rebuilding any kind of relationship with her, not even a friendship. It's obvious she's not happy. I can see the emotional weight of our breakup still weighs on her, and it's likely she regrets what she did. But regret doesn't erase the fact that she betrayed me. Some might be able to forgive such a betrayal, but for me, that door is closed. She made her choice, and now she has to live with the consequences. Despite her remorse, the fallout from the Monday night football incident has left her reputation in shambles. Everyone who witnessed it remembers her, and not in a flattering light. Rumor has it she gets plenty of date offers, though to her credit, she hasn't accepted any. But I imagine it's painful, knowing that most of these men see her as nothing more than an easy conquest. That's the harsh reality she now faces. It's not a dignified way to live, but it's the life she created for herself. In the end, she threw away our marriage and everything we built for a fling with a man who never cared about her. And now, she's left with nothing but regret.